Conversations across time. 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 Conversations across time.
Welcome to Conversations Across Time, the TV show that allows you to witness provocative and entertaining conversations between historical personalities. We discuss history and we relate it to current world events. And tonight, I am very pleased to have, of course, my co-host and partner in crime, former State Representative Babette Joseph. Welcome again, Babette.
Thank you so much.
And seated next to Babette is Pope Clement VII. Welcome, Pope Clement.
Peace be with you.
And seated next to Pope Clement is Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine.
Hello.
Welcome.
Merci.
And our last guest is the master of strategy, the fountain from whom so much that is used today in current times with war and strategy and politics, Master Sun Tzu. Welcome,
Greetings.
Master. Now, this is the second time that you are here as guest. And when we left the last time, Master, you were explaining the difference between types of spies and how spies are used. And if I may recap for a moment, we talked about the fact that a way that spies, as you described spies being used, is, for instance, if a conversation would happen between two people, between Pope Clement and Eleanor of Aquitaine, for instance, and they would say something in talking to each other in the presence of Babette, and that Babette would come back to me as someone that I trust, not having participated in the conversation, but having overheard it, and think that the information that they were talking about was true, but it would not be. And because I trust Babette, I would, of course, be inclined to believe the false information that Queen Eleanor and Pope Clement were speaking of.
Correct.
And so, given that, and maybe coming up with a more cogent and recent example of that, Pope Clement, as I'm sure you are aware in following what is going on currently, which is one of the beautiful leaps that we can take with Conversations Across Time, the United States was placed in the position of going to war with Iraq. Now, we did this in 2003, but it was after there had been a horrendous attack on this country on September 11th, 2001. And can you explain the parables between, or not the parables, but the parallels between the example that Master Sun Tzu gave of misinformation and that information being given or provided to someone that is trusted, and that trusted person coming back and making that representation, which would cause different things to happen?
I can. I think the Bush administration took Sun Tzu's Art of War and they took the playbook right out of it in terms of spying and using spies. What they did was they used Colin Powell as the person they were going to give misinformation to. And they gave him misinformation about uranium and the capabilities of Iraq to build a nuclear weapon and weapons of mass destruction. And he announced that before the United Nations, and based on that information, we were able to get Congress, the nations of the world, to go to war with Iraq based on faulty information. And Colin Powell did not know it was faulty at the time. He was set up, and it was taken right from the playbook of this distinguished man who originated the art of war.
And I'd like to explain, Master Sun Tzu, Colin Powell was someone that was just beloved and trusted,
He would make the perfect spy.
not even realizing that he was being used as a spy.
Not at all. Those are sometimes the best spies to use of all. The ones who don't know that they're delivering the misinformation. Preferably someone with influence or someone with authority in some branch. You bring that person to your cause, you feed them misinformation, you make them believe that their cause is just, and then you send them out to do your bidding. So I would say that they took a great page from my book and used it very well.
Yes, to our everlasting shame, I would say.
Perhaps
In
out of
this
context,
country.
yes.
I think, and for the great amount of respect that the population held for Colin Powell, and I mean, the thing that made him so perfect for them is Colin Powell was military, so we trusted him. But not only was he military, he was an African American man who just had a presence that was commanding, has a presence that's commanding.
And he was likable.
And he
which
was
is very
likable.
And he
important.
also
And he
led
was
us
a
in the he led the
Republican.
United States in the Gulf War.
Yep.
Yes, and he had
Yeah.
led the United States in the Gulf War, and as you say, Babette, he's a Republican. I mean,
So
he was.
people were just astounded that this
Covers all
person-
bases, yeah.
They covered all bases, absolutely.
And they lied to him shamefully, and they lied to us.
Yes, yes, and
And they continue to lie to us. So that we're spied on all the time, and we don't even know how.
yes. And Queen Eleanor, interestingly enough, in that we talked about how you studied Master Sun Tzu. I don't think anyone really recognizes the amount of cultural things that you did. I mean, we at least need to talk about the fact that Henry, following and taking a page out of Sun Tzu's book, used his dear friend, his childhood friend, Thomas Becket. Thomas Becket was the Archbishop, and Thomas Becket and Henry had been close friends. And when I say close friends, they, at the time, I think the expression that they used is they went winching together for up-to-date message of what winching together means. They literally whored around together.
Yes, that's always a way that males bond. It's astounding.
And that at some point, much to your dismay, Henry decides when Becket is no longer being his pawn, I think he actually said, well, we're playing it. I'm king and you're archbishop, and we're playing a game again, a boys' game again. And when Becket took the duties of his office, his clerical duties, seriously, and when he began to demonstrate that, Henry
Henry got rid of him.
had him beheaded. However, they were two people that were so close, and I'm wondering if indeed they weren't following some of your principles.
Well,
if Henry wasn't.
Certainly didn't have very much. When she had 8 children, right, with this husband, she would have killed in a minute if she could have.
With my second husband, yes.
Yes. And did outlast him. And did avenge the death of her older son. And was the mother of 4 kings. Very few people are the mother of 4 kings. Even if you really like your sons, they're not really 4 kings.
It was a remarkable life that I have lived. And I do owe a great deal to Sun Tzu. The information that you gave in the book was amazing. And it led me in so many different ways. Of course, being a woman and having intuition, I was not only able to use your strategies, I was able to put forth my own feminine touch, so to say.
Well, you didn't sort of have an army except once
No.
anyway, so that you had to use his techniques, didn't you? Because
I did. Especially
The only time you
the
really had an
spies.
army was when you went on that one crusade.
Oui.
My dear child, though, may I ask you a question? As a very, very strong and practicing and devout Catholic, on what grounds did you even want an annulment other than to marry someone who had more land and would give you more power?
I had no other grounds other than pursuing what was rightfully mine to begin with.
Did you find Henry to be more exciting? For instance, you did want Louis to capture, you wanted him to capture Toulouse, which had belonged to your family.
Oui.
And when Louis refused to do that, did you perceive that Henry was someone who was more warlike, who was more,
Younger.
and he was younger? Yes.
Oui.
You know, we old ladies like young guys, you know?
Oui.
So, my dear child, you're no different than I in the sense that you allowed your ambition and your geopolitical goals to trump your Catholicism.
Which is exactly why I said to you, or I said to Babette, that you repented. I said that, I don't know if it was heard, but you did your penance, you repented, and so therefore you are forgiven.
How did you repent then?
In many ways.
Well, she ran the country.
In many ways. I gave back.
Not easy.
Yeah.
She watched her older son be murdered by her husband. Not too easy.
And you were also,
And she outlived everybody.
and she outlived everyone. That's exactly right. And one of the things that was also interesting that people do not talk about with you is the fact that you supported the arts. I mean, you knew and you had this band of people who went around and performed shows, and those shows actually had political messages, almost what we would call, you are the mother of satire.
So then she's shaping the moral will of the people, which is
Exactly,
also
yes.
something that's very
More or
important
less.
within the art of war. That's necessary in order to have support to go to battle.
And shaping political.
And shaping
So
political.
was she the Fox News of the 1100s?
I'd like to think of her as the MSNBC. But when we come back, I think we should at least take up some of the other things that you did, because the whole notion of satire, the whole notion of troubadours, all of that started with you as an accomplished woman. And I believe Master Sun Tzu will address exactly, well, as he's already alluded to, that you shape the will of the people. So that we will take a short break, and we'll come back. And please stay with us for Conversations Across Time. Conversations Across Time. It's an idea that has been germinating for a long time, and I believe there's something for everyone. It's education and entertainment.
So here I am, waiting for a bus on a street corner when my friend Vivian drives by in a car and says, "Babette, I want you. I need you." So I thought, sure, and I had a card with me, my business card. I gave it to her, and I thought, I probably won't hear from Vivian again. for a while, but right away she emailed me, she called me, and now I'm doing her concept, which is really, really interesting, to make history alive and to relate it to what's happening now in our country and our world.
Hello, I'm Janice LaFlamme, and this is Conversations Across Time.
Before the break, we were having a discussion with Queen Eleanor and talking about the fact that she could be considered as the mother of modern satire. And with that thought in mind, I'd also like to at least have a conversation about what's going on today, in that you, as the person who used theater, not only for satire, but you were able to use it effectively for propaganda, not unlike what we see happening today.
On the internet, but there was no internet, so it was the troubadours.
Yes.
What did they do? They went around?
They did. They performed, and they alluded to many of the thoughts that I wanted them to think and to then become part of their culture and their political, so to speak, way of.
So you actually shaped public opinion. I mean, that's really what you did, and quite effectively.
More or less.
Well, she certainly reigned without, we don't hear any stories about rebellions or great discontent or...
And that I can give credit to once again.
She conquered the people without ever raising a sword, which is the best way to do it.
This is exactly.
Because it's not so
The most
wasteful.
cost effective. It's the most effective way to expend energy of your resources and your people.
I had no other choice.
Yes,
There's also that.
yes. You could not raise an army.
But I did not need one. So
No, you didn't.
And I find that interesting in terms of what is going on today. I mean, political attitudes are shaped so much by media. And when we think that during this time people were traveling by horseback, and that you were able to persuade these groups of people to go about from town to town spreading the propaganda that was, and I mean propaganda in the most elementary sense. I don't mean it as in terms of anything negative, just the message of the leader.
Of the court, the
But
beautiful
again,
court,
exactly.
and the elegance of it, the beauty of the fabrics, the music, the art, the mathematicians,
but
the
again,
scientists, the writers.
they were performers.
The other thing is, of course, there wasn't a lot of competition
No, but the most important,
for entertainment.
it was perceived as entertainment, but at the same time, it was the unwilling. They were performers.
Right.
Let me ask this, because Pope Clement, you were a patron of the arts. I mean, that's one of the things that when you're rated and they talk about your papacy, we spoke in the first segment last week, we talked about the fact that people viewed you as a bad pope. And I'm happy that you clarified the fact that, well, you were viewed as a bad pope from the standpoint of your interest was more to take care of your family. That was, you protected your family, you protected Florence. And Florence, as we know, as you explained, was the cultural center. So, you commissioned Michelangelo.
I commissioned Da Vinci and Michelangelo. Da Vinci in my youth when I was a cardinal, and on my deathbed I commissioned Michelangelo to paint the Last Judgment on the Sistine Chapel. That was part of my penance for the sack of Rome and also my contribution to the arts. But I only followed in the footsteps of my great uncle who
Lorenzo.
raised me, Lorenzo the Magnificent, who taught us all the most important thing were the arts. And he commissioned numerous artists, as did I as Cardinal, and as did my cousin Leo, who was the Pope. And we felt the arts were very important. And if you notice, most of the things we commissioned were of a temporal or religious nature, because that's how we spread the word. And getting back to what the moderator said about current propaganda in TV and blogs and the internet, we use the paintings, we use the sculptures as propaganda measures for the church, and that's one of the reasons we patronize the arts. Now, it had the good point that we have the masterpieces that have come down to us today.
That have survived to this day.
Yes.
And what's interesting about some of the masterpieces is that we look at those and we revere them, and I mean, there are so many people that look at some of the art that you commissioned, and we hold it in such high regard. And I think it's almost like you made it the importance of art. You were at least the Pope that's most remembered. When you were Cardinal, of course, and when you were Pope, you're most remembered for your heavy hand in getting these artists to accomplish these tasks, which were, in a sense, propaganda.
Yes.
Well, they were, absolutely.
Yes.
But I did do that, but I got it from my uncle who raised me, Lorenzo the Magnificent. He taught me that, so he deserves more credit than I do.
The churches themselves, the cathedrals,
Yes.
ordinary people lived in hovels. And then they went into these magnificent buildings that soared above them, and light streamed in, and in front of them was the deity. I mean, that must have been so awe-inspiring that people were afraid to be non-religious. The people really feared cursing out God, which we do every day in the modern world.
Yes. Yes.
The techniques of propaganda go back to the master. Eleanor used them, we used them, and of course they went further and exploited in the way you just mentioned by Goebbels and Nazi Germany and the types of extravaganzas they produced. And
Lena Richtenstein.
Yes, exactly.
And again, it's far more cost effective to go into an area and make friends of the people rather than to make war with them.
Children's songs, right? Children's poems.
Yes.
That's what you. Why are all or most of the young people environmentalists? Because they read that story by Dr. Seuss and the what is it? The Lummets, the trees, the whatever.
The Lorax.
The Lorax, exactly.
Yes.
That's propaganda.
The Lorax speaks for the trees.
That's right. You read it to your kid, and you just thought it was a children's story, but it wasn't. It was environmental propaganda.
Exactly.
And when we talk about the art of war, and just as your tenet, when you talk about the way to win a war, I mean, would you explain that again, the best way to win a war?
The best way to win a war is basically through deception. There's a chapter in my book that says, if you are far from your enemy, make him think that you are near. If you're weak, make him think you're strong. If you're strong, make him think that you're weak. Therefore, your enemy is off balance. He never knows what you're truly doing. Using spies to sow propaganda into your enemy camp. Making use of what you have at hand, and adding those things to your own strength are all ways of waging effective warfare and a path to victory.
Psychological warfare.
Psychological warfare.
And I can't, I mean, I'm sitting here saying, dare I bring this up? Is that maybe what we're seeing with Mr. Putin?
Well, that seems more like warfare to me.
Well,
I think maybe we're trying to do the psychological part.
Some of the things that he's doing though is he's cutting off that area from resources.
He's separating his enemy from supplies.
Right, which is one of the primary tenets of ways to wage war against your enemies.
And it's psychological, is it not? Because no one knows what he's going to do. I mean, he's amassed troops at the border of the Ukraine. Are the troops going to march into the Ukraine?
Probably not.
Probably not. And then he also has,
But we don't know. Of course.
but we don't know. He's managed to keep the whole world at the end of it, at the edge of the seats.
But he
at the edge
doesn't
of our
have
seats.
to. Well, from right in the Art of War, it says you don't have to necessarily invade your enemy. You can cut him off from all supplies in the world, and he can fail just as well that way.
But that's what
That's what we're trying to do. That's
to
what
him.
the sanctions are.
And there you go. And there's the
That-
next
again.
level up.
There you
Right,
are.
right. So we've got to a point where I think both sides, or at least I hope we understand, we can't have a hot ground war. So we're working on these sanctions. We're trying to make them feel the punishment economically. We want the people of Russia to be complaining to Putin, you can't keep doing this because we're losing our jobs, we're starving, we're cold, we're whatever it is. And that's what our goal is. Whether we can achieve it is another question.
It's definitely a sound premise. It says right in the Art of War, if your enemy is starving, cut him off from food.
But all due respects to the master, all the great leaders, except myself, read The Art of War. And therefore, it's the execution and implementing
Yes.
what you so wisely have written. And because they've all read the same things. So it's the execution.
Which you apparently did as a cardinal better than as a
I
pope.
did it much better as a cardinal than I did as a pope.
There's a lot of examples in history that would say that's replete. People did okay until they became the president or the king.
That's correct.
And with that in mind, I mean, it is interesting because we could talk about present day examples of that, where people are just not cut out to sit in the seat, but they can definitely be the power behind the throne and very effective at that.
I guess maybe the modern day name for that would be the Peter Principle.
Yes.
Yes. You want to explain?
Well, the Peter Principle is you rise to the level of your incompetence. So I was competent as a cardinal. When I became pope, I became much more incompetent. I didn't mean Pope Peter, our savior, or anything. I meant the Peter Principle.
Yes, yes. No, and I think that this is probably a good place for us to bring this conversation across time to a close, because there's so much more that we could talk about and so many exploits that we could talk about. And Master Sun Tzu, it is just so wonderful that you have come here and shed some or illumined this discussion for us, because where we are right now is we see this happening in current times. We see this happening in current policy, and it's really, they're just using principles that are, what, 3,000 years old now? Are we
Nothing
close to-
new under the sun?
Nothing new under the sun.
So true.
So I'm going to, at some future point, I hope that the panel will grace us and maybe we can pick up on this conversation again. But this has been most inspiring and most illuminating, because we are living currently in some times of upheaval. And I think many of our viewers are a little unsettled as to what is going on, what is going on with policy and what's going to happen in the Ukraine, all of these things. And so I thank you for gracing us tonight and having this conversation with us and letting us know that this is a conversation across time, but this is a conversation for time. And as we are witnessing these, experiencing these problems now, they will continue. So I thank you so much. Thank you, Babby, as always. Thank you, Pope Clement.
Peace be with you.
Thank you, Queen Eleanor.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, Master Sun Tzu. And this has been Conversations Across Time. We look forward to you joining us for another interesting, illuminating, and provocative conversation across time. Good night.
Conversations across time, 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 conversations conversations across time, 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 across.